Hey, BookTube, Chelsea, the Reading Outlaw here to do my September wrap up. I cannot believe that it's already October. Like, holy shit, it's finally October. It's been super rainy here for a while and the temperatures are finally cooling down. So, like, I'm very excited, but also the whole world is on fire. It's just never gonna stop. It's never gonna stop. All right, friends, let's talk about the books. That's what we're here today to do. So I read 7 books in the month of September. I read 3 audiobooks, 3 physical books, and 1 ebook. Going through these in terms of the star ranking, I actually only had 3-star and above books. So while it wasn't a super busy reading month, it was a pretty good reading month. The first 3-star book that I read is Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. This is a book that my partner really loves and that he's been wanting me to read for a long time. I enjoyed it. It is very much so a like Bildungsroman coming of age story in a small town, Zephyr, Alabama, in the 1960s. And we follow several kind of kids throughout the town and one boy in specifically as he goes about his life and grows up. And it's really about kind of the realization of A, that your parents are people, and B, that the myths that create your childhood are myths, and that as you continue to examine them, you deepen your understanding of the world you live in, but you also come to realize that like the world you've created for yourself is created. It's a really interesting book. I listened to it on audio. There were parts of it I really, really loved that captured this kind of like almost magical nostalgia that felt very like Ray Bradbury-esque. And you guys know that I really, really love Ray Bradbury. But as a whole, something about the book just was a little bit generic to me. And so I ended up only giving it 3 stars. If you guys can hear, that's my little helper today. She decided she wasn't going to nap. So here we are. She's contributing from off camera her opinions of some of these. Moving on to the 4-star books I read. The first one was Kiss of Snow by Nalini Singh. This is the 10th book in the Psy Changeling series. It was the last one I had to read for the next like chunk video that I had to film for Sexy Saturdays. This is also a book at which I kind of like hit a little bit of a stopping point in terms of the action is really picking up. And so I knew that before I listened to the rest of the books, I would need to be in a place where I could like focus on them and really power through them all one-on-one. So I haven't picked up the next one yet, but this is the book that is Hawk and Sienna. We have been waiting for this book. We have been watching Hawk and Sienna dance around each other as a couple and as 2 people for literally the entire 10-book run of this series so far. Because of that, it feels very cathartic to finally be getting this story, and I can only imagine, and I've only heard how much more intense that feeling was for people who are reading along contemporaneously to as these books were published. I really like the dynamic between Hawk and Sienna. I kind of like this idea of struggling between like this societal elder and this older person and this younger woman who's mature in a lot of ways that this older man isn't. And like age dynamic stuff can be kind of tricky depending on how the power situation plays out, but I really, really liked the way Nalini handles that. She's very good at dealing with those kind of power dynamics and making sure that they balance out and are justifiable and enjoyable in that way. Next up was Beyond Forever. This is a novella in the O'Kane for Life novella series by Kit Roca. I read this book for Beyond the Sectors podcast, so I'm not going to say a ton about it, although I will list the episode down below when it goes live. This is the novella about Lex and Dallas that takes place both contemporaneously in the book after everything that's happened and also flashes back to the beginning of their relationship, and we kind of go back and forth in time as we watch them dance around each other. This is a really, really interesting book, like meta, because of the fact that it takes place after this Contained series and we know how this relationship ends up between them. So to go back in time and to see it develop is a very interesting kind of balance to achieve. And tension-wise, I think Kit Roca really, really, really nailed it. I really enjoy these books. This is not my favorite of the 2 O'Kane for Life novellas. That one goes to Beyond Doubt, which is Bren and Six's novella, but I still really, really enjoy this one. The next 4-star book that I read was Remnant Population by Elizabeth Moon. This is another book I read for a different podcast. This is the Lady Vault's book pick of the month for October. So Elizabeth and I sat down to chat about it together. This is a really, really beautiful book about a woman named Ophelia who is on a colony that is lost its funding and has been shut down, and her family has been told that she is basically dead weight. They're going to charge their family extra for putting her into cryosleep and transporting her to the new colony. So Ophelia decides she's going to stay behind. She's fuck that noise. She's had enough of it. So she stays behind and she meets the alien population of this planet and begins to function as kind of teacher, steward, human ambassador, reluctantly kind of figure. It's a really, really, really interesting story of feminism and femininity and gender roles and soft labor versus hard labor, and how we define value in our societies and in future societies, and what that can look like and what we expect of other people, and the bigotries that we can hold. Elizabeth and I had a really, really awesome, like, hour-plus long conversation about it that I'm super excited to have hit the airwaves. So as soon as that episode goes live, I will, of course, link it below and put it all over my social media. And then the last 4-star book that I read this month was a reread, but it was a reread of The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This is the US cover that I still don't really like. I much prefer the UK cover, which is the person standing looking up, and it's got the night full of stars. But whatever it is on the outside, I thoroughly, thoroughly love this book. This book only got 4 stars for me on this reread because the episodic nature of it stood out a little bit more and kind of rubbed me a little bit more of the wrong way, I think because of the next book I'm going to talk about. But I really, really find comfort and a deep amount of joy and optimism in all of the writing that Becky Chambers does. And my favorite characters in this, Kizzy, Jinx, Sussex, Rosemary, all of them, I could have named them for you even before I did the reread. They leave such a lasting impression, and she has such a caring sense for humanity in all of her books that are coupled with these, like, adventurous science fiction ideas. If you have not read this one yet, this is the story of the crew of the Wayfarer, who basically make long-distance highways exits, basically. They punch holes through space. They're tunnelers. They punch holes through space to connect super far away planets and cities and all of those things. And it's about a new kind of area of space that opens up to them, and they take a job to punch a hole to this new area of space to take the long way to a small angry planet. It does what it says on the tin. If you have not picked it up, I highly, highly, highly recommend picking it up. Becky Chambers just this year won the best Hugo for, like, series, the best series Hugo for this series, and it's so fucking amazing. Once you're done with that, pick up the other 2, if for no other reason than then you can move on to the 5-star books, which we're officially getting into. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. I know already that this is going to be a super divisive book because it's already dividing a bunch of the people I know who have read it. The ending on this book will be something that lots of people want to talk about, I think, once they've read it. And we can debate whether or not you think it is an ending that you would have embraced, like if you would have done what the characters did, or if you think it's a worthy ending on its merit just for the way that the narrative is structured. I happen to think that Becky Chambers does enough emotional narrative work over the course of the novella that the ending is earned. But that's a lot of talk about the ending for a book that we haven't actually talked about the rest of it yet. This is a really interesting book about Loki 6, an interstellar science like exploratory mission that is crowd-funded and exists to go and explore new planets through a process called somaforming. So there's this, like, the general theory of terraforming, which is changing the land to suit human physiology or to, like, suit your needs. This book turns that a little bit on its head and instead embraces a world in which people somaform, or astronauts somaform. They transform their bodies to be more suitable for the climates in which they visit. So one of the planets they go to has a lot of gravity, and so during their deep sleep on the way to this planet, the astronauts are, like, their bone density is increased and their muscle mass is increased so that they can handle the additional pressure. And, like, they go to a planet where there's very, very, very little light, and so their skin is made glittery so it reflects what light particles there are and helps them be able. So it's like, it's that kind of shit. It's so incredibly fascinating. This book, I wrote a super long review of this book for my blog, which I will link down below, but long story short, Becky Chambers uses this book to craft a love letter to science and a love letter to community and communal work and to an eternal optimism and faith in humanity, basically. Like, that sounds like a whole lot for this little book, but there's so much here and I so thoroughly loved it. There are trigger warnings for a kind of animal cruelty or animal death, and also for depression, anxiety, suicidal ideations, borderline attempted suicide, kind of. It's open to interpretation the way that it's being read, but I think it's pretty clear to me what was happening. But yeah, that is To Be Taught If Fortunate. It is the newest Becky Chambers novella, and it is not a part of her Wayfarer series. It is its own standalone. So even if you don't jive with Long Way, or you don't want to read all of those books first, you can definitely go ahead and pick this one up, and I really recommend that you do. And then the last 5-star book I read this month is one that I just finished over the weekend. In fact, you guys saw me talk about it in my Saturday snapshot if you watched that video. And it is The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma by Bessel van der Kolk. This is a book by Bessel van der Kolk, who's a doctor, who's a psychologist, about many, many things all revolving around trauma and the way that the body physically experiences trauma and the way that that physicality needs to be factored into the understanding and treatment of trauma. This book is broken up into 3 different sections. The first one is an outline of Bessel van der Kolk's kind of history within psychology, psychopharmacology, his work with veterans and the VA, developing these theories of trauma and somatic experience and therapies of trauma. The second one gets into like a really kind of brief overview of the brain and brain chemistry and some very beginnings like psychopharmacology and medication, as well as like trauma and what happens to the body in times of trauma and how that differs in untraumatic times or for populations who have not experienced trauma. Then the last section lays out different treatment modalities and different therapeutic efficacies of different like ways that people can deal with trauma in the body, like therapeutically. Like I'm specifically reading this book as part of my certification to become like a trauma certified yoga teacher. So, and there is a section in the last part of this book that's on therapy and like breath work and body work in dealing with populations that have experienced trauma and how helpful that can be and how it can be helpful. I really, really enjoyed this book. I think it's worth reading just for an understanding of trauma by itself, like whether or not you are a trauma survivor. There are so many fascinating things in this book about the way that our brains and our bodies are interconnected and how important that connection is, that I think it's just really, really worth picking up. But yeah, that is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And I'm really glad that this was one of the books that I was like assigned to or found to read for that certification. So yeah, that is my September wrap up. Just kind of general thoughts. This was a little bit slower of a September for me than it usually is. Usually September is like one of my bigger months because we're like rocking that back to school vibe and like shit is happening. But I think this year I just channeled a lot more of that energy into starting a bunch of various like other projects as opposed to just like binging a ton of books. But we are getting into October, which is Spoopy month, which is my favorite month of the year other than like, well, my birthday and Christmas. So basically we start my favorite months of the year because we are now moving into October. But yeah, let me know down below what your September was like, what you've been reading. I want to give a quick booktuber shout out or call out to Melanie, Mel to the Any, whose vlogs I've really been loving, like watching lately. I've done a really big deep dive on her channel. I love her content. I love her personality. She's super into BTS, the Korean like K-pop group. That is a whole world that I am fascinated by to watch on the outside. I've never listened to any of their music, but that is like a fandom culture that I find super fascinating. But she is one of the co-runners of Contemporary-thon, and I just love the aesthetic look of her videos and just love everything about them. So I've been watching a lot of her stuff in September too, so that is my shout out to wrap up this particular September month review. Let me know down below what you've been reading, how your month was. Like I said, if you've made it all the way through this video, leave me an emoji in the comment box. On your way there, if you want to hit subscribe and like and the bell button and all of those things. I am kind of not so whisper campaigning to hit 3,000 subscribers by my birthday in November. So if you feel up to it, go ahead and subscribe, hit the button, pass this video along. And until next time, friends, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and have happy reading. Bye.